Okay, so these are the best decks in the Hearthstone meta right now, and I'm making this before the set comes or the changes come out because this is what I'm speculating will be the best, and I will be releasing this before the patch comes out. But you already know that because you're watching the video. Anyway, point is, these are going to be my best decks, and for one of them, you may think, well, I don't agree, but I will explain why. But you'll have to wait to see that one. However, I will just jump right into it. The best deck in the meta right now, I personally think, is Mid-Range Hunter. Mid-Range Hunter has it all. It has aggro if you need it. It has card draw. It has late game with Rexar. It has control with rushes and the fact that you could Dire Frenzy one back into your deck and continue to control the board that way. It has everything. The reason why I think it's better than Secret Hunter and Spell Hunter. Also, I'm going to try to not use more than one deck a class, so this is the Hunter deck I'm spotlighting right now. The reason why I think it's better is because the other one's Secret and Spell. If you don't get Spellstone, the deck is significantly weaker, whereas this one, it's good at pretty much all stages of the game, regardless of what minions you draw. Unless you draw abysmally and they're all just too big and you can't play anything. It's just really, really strong and good. So that's the first one. The first one is Mid-Range Hunter. And for some of these, I have deck guides on. So if I do have one, I will put it as an iCard in the top right corner. And Mid-Range Hunter is one of those decks. The next best deck, in my opinion, is Odd Paladin. Yes, it's simple. Yes, it's easy to pilot. Yes, it's fairly cheap, but that does not change the fact that it is still probably one of the best decks in the meta. It beats a lot of the matchups. It has the potential to go aggro and beat out priests and control decks. It can rebuild boards into control decks as well. It can match other decks such as Even Shaman and Odd Rogue with its constant hero power and pressure on the board. It can deal with Secret Hunter and Spell Hunter because of the fact that they only have limited removal. After the Rexar and their one explosive trap, as an Odd Paladin, you can just start controlling the board. And quick side note, this one, the deck guide that I have is for a budget version of this deck, but pretty much everything remains the same except for the fact that I don't have Leroy or the Corridor Creeper. Speaking of which, this deck also has amazing closeout potential. Similar to the fact that Odd Rogue has Leroy into Cold Blood, this deck has Leroy into Blessing of Might, which is 9 damage potentially. Not only that, but has some pretty ridiculous power plays with a potential Frostwolf Warlord. You get extra cards with Stonehill Defender and decent card draw with Divine Favor. This deck has pretty much everything you could ever want in a deck. Not only that, but you can choose to go aggro with your minions or control and trade into the board until the other person runs out of resources. It can do pretty much everything, and it's easy to play. And for those reasons, I'd say that Odd Paladin is the next best deck in the game right now. The next one, in my opinion, is Control Priest. I think Control Priest is more consistent than its, other one, the Clone Priest, which is just, in my opinion, worse. It relies on, a couple of cards to win the game. But Control Priest has Dragon Synergy and so many ways of controlling the board and staying ahead and just also being able to close out the game with Shadow Reaver Anduin, as well as Mind Blast and Holy Wrath. Or not Holy Wrath, I apologize. It's actually called Holy Fire. I forgot it for a split second there. I kind of stalled to remember the name. But Holy Fire has multiple ways of actually dealing with the board. It also has Alexstrasza to lower the person's health down to 15. It has ways of stealing cards from the opponent with the Twilight Acolyte and Cabal Shadow Priest combo. There's so many things that this deck can do. It's so versatile. It can't go super aggro, so into Clone Priest, it might have a bit of a problem. It basically comes down to who can burst the other person down first. But it still beats a lot of the other decks. I think it beats most Hunter decks and some aggro decks just in general. And because of Psychic Scream, it beats Mechathune. It just has a lot of potential. I think it's a really, really good deck. I think that it's something people should look into. The only issue is, I was going to say it's a little pricey, but it's not even that pricey either. It only has 2 legendaries. One, a classic card that people might actually have already, Alexstrasza, and then the other one, Shadow Reaver Anduin. So there's really no downside to this deck except for the fact that it might not be as fast as you need it into some matchups, but you have the trade-off of having it being able to control the board. Do not have a guide for this one though, so you might have to look somewhere else for that, but that doesn't change the fact that this deck is probably top 3 material, just because of the fact that its win rate is pretty decent, and I'm not including like multiples of a deck, so yes, some other hunter decks might beat it, but if you want to play priest, this is probably the best priest deck right now. The next deck that I think is top tier, there are 3 more left, so stay tuned for all of these, is Odd Warrior, Odd Quest Warrior specifically. I think that the fact that it has the potential win condition with the quest is really strong. It has pretty decent control. It has, I don't know, it's got everything you could possibly need. It can't die. It can drag the game out for like an infinite amount of time. And I have a guide on this, whether it be Quest or Odd Dragon Warrior, which I actually think both are pretty similar. This is actually the one time where I'm going to include 2 different decks because they're very similar, and I think both of them have a lot of potential. I think Odd Warrior, Odd Quest Warrior, has a win condition, so it can close out games into some decks, but into other decks, it's not as good because you trade your control for aggro once you finish your quest, whereas if you play into a full-on aggro deck, you can just keep up the Odd Warrior without the quest and bring the guy into fatigue and just never die, which I think is a little more boring, so personally I would recommend playing Odd Quest Warrior, but they're both around the same win rate. They're both pretty similar playstyle-wise until you deviate with the quest, and I think that both of them have a lot of potential. Quest Warrior also has the potential win condition with Undasta. Odd Warrior doesn't necessarily run that as much, although if you want to run it in Odd Warrior just without the quest, you can as well. But that's up to you. Additionally, if you have other like big heavy hitter cards like Ysera, Ysera takes the place of Lich King in this deck because it can't run it because it's even, which means that you can get some extra really valuable cards from Ysera, which is pretty much your extra win condition in this deck. So both decks are pretty good. Odd Quest Warrior has the win condition with the quest, and Undasta. Odd Warrior has the win condition of stalling the game out, and Ysera, as well as Dragon Synergy, which helps control the board and has some pretty solid statted minions of its own. So they're both pretty good. I would recommend them both, and I have a guide on both if you want to check either of them out, and I'll put those in the iCard above. So this next one is my personal favorite deck in the meta right now, and it is Odd Secret Mage. It's kind of an aggro deck, and it relies on synergies with secrets as well as aggro. And you've seen me play it before. I have a guide on it, so I'll put that as an iCard at the end of this little chat. But it has actually everything as well. Its hero power is very strong, so it can help remove the board. It has a decent amount of card draw with Black Cat and the Pyromaniac. It has early game power with the Secret Keeper and Dire Mole potentially, along with the Firefly, which means that you can actually have a pretty decent state early game, control stuff with your hero power, and just slowly build off of that. It only runs 1 Fungal Mancer because it's actually more spell-based. That being said, it has more spells, which means it helps to control the board fairly well. It has some spell damage. The fact that it has the Tor Mage and Secret Synergy means that on turn 3, actually on turn 2, if you coin into 3 mana, you can have 6 mana value for 3 mana just immediately, which can be a huge, huge swing into your favor. Especially if you play Explosive Runes on turn 3, that basically means, okay, you don't get to play a 3-drop, you take damage for playing that 3-drop, and I maintain pressure on the board. It has a lot of direct damage, and last but not least, it has Ragnaros in the deck. Okay, it doesn't actually have Ragnaros, but it has the Dragonhawk, what's her face? Janali, I think it is. It has Janali. It has a decent amount of card draw with Stargazer Luna as well. I forgot that card existed in the deck, but talking about it, I realize that now. It has a nice little combo with the Daring Fire Eater and the Clockwork Automaton and hero power, which is an 8 mana, 8 damage hero power, which is also super strong. It's got so many things. The only thing I have a hard time dealing with is a wide board. You have Arcane Missiles and Cinderstorm that could potentially deal with that, and if you feel like it's a big enough issue, you could potentially take out an additional card for that new 5 mana deal 2 damage to everything. If you feel like you're getting overrun by wide boards, which I don't think you should. I don't think you should run that card personally, but if you feel like you need to because wide boards are a huge problem for you, you could take out like a Fungalmancer for it, I guess. Because Fungalmancer is actually not as useful in this deck. That's why you only run one. That being said, I still think Fungalmancer is way better than running that other card, whatever it's called. I don't even know what it's called, to be honest, but I think that as is, the deck is really, really strong. But if you feel the need to have some extra removal, you could definitely throw that in there if you want. The last one is Odd Rogue. Now you may be thinking, what are you talking about? Odd Rogue just got nerfed. It's been obliterated. It no longer can even use Cold Blood, you idiot. And to that I reply, you're right, but also, think about it. Is it really that big of a nerf? Basically, it means your final combo with Leroy could lose 4 damage. But if you're going for burst, you could potentially replace this card with Abusive Sergeant. It's not nearly as good, but it also gives you a body on the board, so it could be a little bit annoying that way. It gives you a little bit of extra burst damage. And overall, I think it's a pretty good play. The reason why I don't think that it was a good nerf, though, is because Blessing of Might still exists for 1 mana and Paladin, which is now just strictly a better card. Which, we're not talking about that right now, but the point is, despite the nerf, even though I don't think it was necessarily needed, I think the deck overall is still really, really strong. It can't necessarily play it on an Argent Squire anymore, which could limit its early game a little bit, like right off the bat. But, like, is that really that big of a deal? Is it? I don't think so. I don't think it's that big of a deal, because I think it's still super strong for multiple different reasons, and those reasons are snowballing minions on the board. Snowballing minions like the Thug and the Vicious Fledgling, and playing Fungalmancer and the Cobalt Scalebane, and taking minions that you have on the board and making them stronger. Cold Blood's a good finisher, but it's usually used as a finisher, and if you need to, you could run like an Argent Squire to help you finish the game out as well if you so choose. So I think that Odd Rogue, this is like a sort of honorable mention into this one, because I don't know how hard the Cold Blood nerf will actually affect them. But I do not think that it will be a huge deal. That being said, I don't think that the nerf on the Hunter's Mark for mid-range Hunter is a huge deal either. I think that it'll still function pretty well, and I don't think it'll lower the win rate that much. So, just wanted to quickly say that. But anyway, yeah. All of these decks are really, really good for multiple reasons. All of these decks, except for one of them, I have guides on if you want to check those out. So, also for this one, I have one on the Odd Rogue. I have one for a budget version that did pretty well, and one for a fully made version. So tune into those if you guys want to check them out, because I think that they're pretty good guides for every single one of these decks. The only different one being the Odd Paladin one. For the Odd Rogue one, I definitely have an actual guide for that if you want to check that out. So stay tuned for all of that. I have iCards as well if you want to just check them out immediately. And I hope you guys enjoyed. Bada bing, bada boom. See ya.